thought the other Friday morning was one of the darkest days of our movement, to be frank. Certainly the darkest day since the Attlee government fell in '51. We expected so much. This platform was put together on the basis we thought Labour might be in a minority government situation. We'd be talking about where we go from here in public services and how we want the investment, how we restructure them, how trade unions can be involved in all of that. And we thought even if they just minority position, we could link up with others, including, yes, the SNP, the Greens and whoever, just to try and get some coalition together to protect our public services. That hope was dashed. We can talk about why that hope was dashed, because I was offended that Sunday when Mandelson and all the others paraded themselves on the television to try and really seize the narrative that this was all about Ed Miliband, great shift to the left. Well, I missed it, I'm afraid. This great shift to the left, and it was all about us losing the middle ground and all the rest of it. Andrew Fisher was here and he's had to go off. We launched the Radical Labour website yesterday and we put his paper up. If you can go on the website, look at that. Look at the papers. A very good cephalological analysis of where the votes went, etc. And what happened, it confirmed what we were saying before, really. Under New Labour, when New Labour was in power, we lost 5 million votes. And this time round, there was a bit of a swing back. But actually, where we lost votes this time round was our core support. So this argument that Ed Miliband went for a 35% core strategy was laughable. We lost, it wasn't just Scotland, but we lost in the northeast right the way across now. And all those old myths of where the Labour core vote now are shattered completely. Actually, there's the strongest pick-up of votes, believe it or not, was in the southwest and the southeast and London. That's where we gained the most. And London now has become the core vote of the Labour vote right the way across the country. And if you look at the second paper that was put up today by Vince Mills, who's the Secretary of the Campaign for Socialism in Scotland, he basically did a good analysis on the basis of what he got feedback from the constituencies in Scotland. He got feedback on the basis of the most common theme, on the expression that was used time and time again, is I've not left Labour, they've left me. When people felt deserted by a party that had given them foreign wars, privatisation, and were promising further austerity. And they went for the SNP, which is a mild social democratic form. In fact, wasn't up until recently, but they've now positioned themselves as a mild social democratic party, anti-austerity. We kept one seat in Scotland. Do you know why we kept it? Because Ian Murray, who's the campaigner there, the MP there, ran a campaign based upon saving his local football club. That was it, because he's so closely attached to the football club. He won it just on the basis of football club votes, not on the basis of saving a Labour MP. It's extraordinary. Complete wipeout on the basis of people flooding towards a party, the SNP, which actually is anti-austerity down here. But what's interesting in Scotland is implementing austerity, because local government cuts are going on apace. I chair the RMT group as well as the PCS group. We're negotiating at the moment to prevent the privatising the ferries. We've also, they pushed out to privatisation again, to franchising the rails in Scotland when they could have held it back until after the election and brought it back under public ownership. So there's a dilemma there about, although I work at the SNP and have done right the way through the worst of the Blair period, and I'm sitting down talking to them now, I realise actually we're not dealing with a socialist party there, we're dealing with a mild form of social democracy at best, and with the still elements in there of core nationalism as well. But if you interpret the SNP as solely nationalist, I think you're wrong. What that vote was all about was a rejection of all those policies that have been inflicted on Scotland by successive New Labour and Tory governments, and they just wanted a change of some sort. You saw that in the North East. In 42 seats now around the country, UKIP are second to Labour. And that means if there's an alternative party, working class people are going to it, because we never give them, it's not about aspiration, it's about inspiration. We never inspired people to come out and vote for us in the way that we've done in the past. We never put together that wide-ranging coalition. In fact, what we did was we systematically alienated it. You saw it tonight. We alienated public sector workers with the cuts that we implemented when we were in government, and then not giving them an alternative in opposition either. We alienated large sections of trade unions because we didn't do enough when we were in power to reverse the anti-trade union laws under Thatcher. And in government, to be frank, I think we betrayed the trade union movement. In opposition, we did so little to inspire them that we'd produce any form of changes either. You go across the piece, it's the same. All those people who support us because they thought we were a party of peace, we alienated them, the Iraq War, etc. And although and I was so pleased that we voted against bombing Syria, it seems all right we don't bomb Syria, but we're willing to spend money on Trident just in case we want to nuke them at some time in the future. It's just extraordinary logic. And it was the offer that we made as a party in the last election was contradictory, absolutely contradictory. We're opposed to austerity in one form, but introduce austerity like. We're opposed to the bedroom tax, but we're quite happy with the welfare cap. There's contradictions all the way through. You know, we oppose the abolition of the ILF, but we're independent living fund, people with disabilities, but we won't want to reinstate it. So it's absolutely clear, quite honest, why people never marched out for us this time, because we just didn't inspire them. And part of the loss of votes was people going to UKIP because I think they were disillusioned with us and just wanted anywhere to protest, quite honestly. People going to the SNP on the same sort of basis, but I think also a large number of people just staying at home. Our turnout was still in the 60% when in the 80s and 90s, well, in the 80s and into the 90s, it was 77, 80%, something like that. That's the situation we're in. Let me just say briefly what I think is going to happen now. We're about to face an absolute hurricane of cuts, privatisations and assault on civil liberties and trade union rights. It's coming. This is what they've had on the shelf for years, to be frank. Their early discussions in the welfare state in the early 90s, if they got back in 97, was to completely demolish the welfare state. Look at some of the early papers that were produced from some of the right-wing think tanks there. What they saw as the erosion of the welfare state, a resort to localised charity at best, with a very, very low safety net overall nationally, and that's the way they're going at the moment. And I think what we'll see in the budget in July is a raft of welfare benefit cuts on a scale we've not seen before. They're looking for £12 billion worth of cuts. Already, as Mark has said, and the WOW campaigners are here now, we've already got large numbers of people who are going through the work capability assessment at the moment and die before they can take up work. It runs into the thousands. We've got large numbers of people who go through that process and commit suicide. And we know that because we've got Callum's list where we monitor it ourselves. But in addition to that, when Esther McVeigh, that person who's no longer in office, thank goodness, but that when we were challenging her, we discovered that they were monitoring coroner's reports, but they were refusing to publish them. Why? Because it would have exposed the number of the circumstances of people who are, as a result, losing their lives through self-inflicted injuries as a result of the cuts in benefits they were experiencing. I expect that the welfare benefit cuts will focus on working class families. They'll restrict child benefit and other benefits, I think, as much as they possibly can. They'll certainly go for tax credits for families with more than two within the family. That seems to be the ideology they're going for. But I think also they'll go for another range of cuts for benefits for people with disabilities. And I think we'll see poverty on a scale. We think it's bad enough now with 1 million going to the food banks. We already know instructions to some staff within the DWP is not to give out the vouchers at the moment, so they reduce the numbers going to food banks artificially, but I think we've seen nothing yet, quite honestly, and I'm terrified of it. That goes alongside the scale of privatisations that I think will now come on. The NHS, I think within 5 years we could lose the NHS wholesale. We've seen the scale of contracts going to the private sector in the recent months, even under the coalition. Something like in 2 years, 60% of the contracts that were coming up went to the private sector itself. I think now they're working on the basis that they will scrap the NHS altogether, free at the point of need, but not much of a service at the point of need. And this idea that you launched yesterday about 7-day services for GPs, I don't know what it's like in your constituencies, but we haven't got the GPs. People can't get an appointment as it is at the moment. We can't recruit for love nor money. And if they are there, they're going abroad, to be frank. A lot of them are going to Australia now, because they can't take the pressure of work that they're under. And I think you'll see the NHS eroded as a result of cuts, but more importantly, privatised. In terms of civil liberties and trade union rights, in the Queen's speech on the 27th, we'll see they'll be bringing forward what they're describing as an employment bill. They'll go for the balloting procedures. We also think what they'll try and do is introduce the ability of employers to bring in agency staff during dispute as well. There's some of the Tories also thinking about requiring in certain sectors a continuing level of service, a guaranteed level of service if industrial action is taking place. There's others on the lunatic fringe of the Tory party, but they often get elected and then become ministers, and go to Cabinet, are looking at exempting whole areas again. Can you remember they took away the right to strike from prison officers? There's some of them that argue that they should look at the transport sector for that, so kill elements of the transport sector. So I think we'll see a blast, absolute blast of legislation which will impact upon trade union rights. The scrapping of the Human Rights Act that we're going for as well is another attempt to just undermine the ability of people to fight back and defend themselves. It's horrendous. It is absolutely horrendous. So what do we do? Three things basically. I follow up what has been said really. If you have an elected dictatorship and people have lost confidence in the ballot box and they've got a government, to be frank, in terms of votes is not a majoritarian vote government anyway. If Parliament fails people, they will take to the streets. It's inevitable. That's what we always do. That's in the historic tradition of this country. We saw it straight away out the weekend after the general election itself, as Candy said, just young people turning up angry about what they felt the result of the election itself. I think that will happen more and more. June the 20th, the anti-austerity demonstration, I think will be absolutely huge. But I think you'll see what was breaking out already. I think in London in particular, London is like a rebel city at the moment. You're finding occupations, demonstrations going off, kicking off all over the place. I think that's going to mount. And I think everyone will seek to use peaceful mechanisms, and of course, you do agents provocateurs, destroying a decent campaign as a result of the way in which they'll manipulate that to manipulate the media. But I think we'll see more and more of that all the way through. So what's our role in all of that? I think if there's a demonstration and occupation, I think everyone should get involved. I think our role is to automatically support, because it's the same old thing. If they're coming for one group, they'll beat them and then they'll come for us. It's that basic symbol of solidarity that we have to put together. And I think you'll see it amongst, it's interesting at the moment, for a generation of young people who were supposed to be apolitical have suddenly become very political. And they're seeing, I think, the writing on the wall. The second thing is industrial action. RMT are in ACAS today. We may see the National Rail strike next week. I'm hoping we can get a negotiated settlement. But if not, the industrial action will take place. What's happening at the National Gallery, and a whole range of disputes now are happening. And I think what's interesting now, in even some of the unions where general secretaries have wanted a quiet life and try to kill off any form of action whatsoever, I think what's happening now is there's a rank and file reaction to that. And what will happen is those unions will either back them or people will come out. I think we're going back into a period of wildcat strikes again, because people can't take it anymore. And it's because you can't survive. You can't survive what you're being paid. The point you made about the minimum wage, it is true there are 5 people at the centre. There are some in regional offices as well, but not many, because there's been cutbacks over the years. Even where there is a minimum wage, you can't enforce it. Just your example is repeated time and time in my constituency, where people are living off pittances. And to be frank, the minimum wage is a pittance anyway for most people to survive. So I think there'll be direct action, occupations, demonstrations, and industrial action, and our job is to support it. But I also think we've got to ensure that we destroy the narrative that they've got. And I'll just conclude on this. At the moment within the Labour Party, we've got the leadership election going on with a number of candidates with a cigarette. You can't put a cigarette paper between them. It's impossible on the numbers for the nomination to get a left candidate on the ballot paper, to be frank. We're struggling, and I think it's virtually impossible. So if we can't use the leadership election to run a candidate from the left to articulate our views, we've got to try and find other means to articulate themselves and lay a foundation of ideas and a new narrative that confronts the reality of what's going on. That's why yesterday we launched this website called Radical Labour, inviting people to submit their views, write papers, etc., just to put the arguments and set the agenda for the Labour leadership debate. So every hustings, every public meeting, all the rest of our leadership candidates go along, we're setting the agenda, we're raising the issues, we're putting the alternatives, we're putting an alternative narrative as well, and creating an alternative potentially future for the Labour Party rank and file members, but also more widely in the Labour and trade union and our wider community as well. So I think we involve ourselves in activism on a scale we've not seen before. 2, we engage in a really ideological struggle now, putting forward ideas, dominating particularly the Labour leadership debate in this coming period. Finally, I think we need to think through as well how we coordinate ourselves. We've got so many left organisations at the moment working against each other rather than for each other, and a lack of coordination overall. In terms of the trade unions, that discussion that you said, Sam, that discussion about coordinated activity we had with the 10 trade unions coordinating through the trade union coordinating group. They're going to drive that into the TUC and basically say, play your role, which is to bring people together in strength. And that means whether you call it general strike or coordinated action, it doesn't matter. Just bring them out together because we're stronger together. And if the TUC can't do it, others will, and there'll be coalitions of individual unions themselves. But within each individual union now, I think we've got to ensure that our unions are accountable to the rank and file. That means a struggle in each union to make sure that's happening. For many of the unions we're working with at the moment, that doesn't need it. We've got a new generation of trade union leaders, Mark, who I think are incredibly effective. But it's up, the responsibility is on all our shoulders. It's the darkest period, but to be frank, out of that dark period is an opportunity for this all of us, but a new generation coming up to learn these lessons, both about what we confront, how the system works and how we confront it, and how powerful we can be as a class. Solidarity.